everybody. This is Venice from Magical Egypt, and I am very, very excited to have the fabulous Peter Mark Adams with us today. Peter is a healer and an author of several amazing books, like absolutely amazing books. And we came across Peter because in season 3, we are doing a look at magic and the mysteries. And let me tell you, it's a very exciting episode, and mostly because of Peter here. I had found Peter through the Rune Soup podcast, and I interviewed him about the mysteries. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be the best mysteries episode ever. And people are going to be completely surprised because all of those, sign up for a mystery school here. Is not exactly what the mysteries are. And then the man started talking about magic, and I'm like, okay, forget about it. That's it. Peter is the man. But tonight we are talking about it's your latest book, isn't it, darling?
It's the first one with Scarlet Imprint. The
Okay.
second one was Misty, the Mysteries. So the two of them. Yeah.
Okay. So I was chasing Peter because of Misty, which is also unbelievably fantastic. And for Magical Egypt people, Magical Egypt 2 basically looks at the art of ancient Egypt. And what it does is it enables us to get inside the mindset of the ancient Egyptians, which is a very, very tricky thing to do, trickier than you might imagine. And I think the thing about Peter's work that absolutely blew me away is that I've never really seen anybody do that before. Look at the art of a culture and get inside their mindset. And so Peter is basically doing for Renaissance art what we were doing for ancient Egyptian art. So it's a very, very beautiful fit. And so he brings a lot to the table. But Peter, I think that for possibly my people, what we might do is, do you want to introduce yourself first properly, sweetie?
Yeah, I mean, you've done a great job so far. I've got not much to add to it. As you say, I've spent many decades actually with energy healing modalities. And I think probably from about the year 2000, last 20 odd years, I've devoted most of my time to writing and research. So I'm published by Scarlet Imprint, which are, a super publisher and great leaders in this field. My earlier book, The Healing Field, has been snapped up by Inner Tradition. So that'll be reissued next year in autumn. And the third leg of my work is poetry largely. And I'm published through Cobblestone Press. They do this beautiful literary journal, Reliquy, a journal of landscape, nature, and myth. So I regularly feature in there as well. And with that said, let's go on.
All right, so you're a poet, and I didn't even know it. No, I did. I was just trying to make my own little poem. All right, so sweetie. No, look at me. Okay. So, sweetie, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about, well, I guess for people to understand what we're talking about today, and there's going to be some of you that are very familiar with this material and some that are not. So we're going to do a little cursory kind of overview. And for those of you who do want more, there are some fabulous interviews or podcasts more than interviews with Peter that really go deep. As I said, there's the Rune Soup one, there's a Glitch Bottle one that was wow. So Peter, for us though tonight, tell us a little bit about the Solarbuska.
Okay, so tonight I wanted to concentrate on the ritual aspects of the cards because they haven't really treated them in depth up to now. So it's necessary to frame them a little before we pitch into this, because ritual as a component in our society, in our culture, and certainly in our art is hardly ever recognized, to be honest. It's there, but it's never discussed. It's never the focus of attention. So in the context of the Solarbuska, the family who had produced this extraordinary deck of cards with the d'Este and a northern Italian Renaissance princely family based around Ferrara and Modena. But they had an ancient lineage going back into the 9th and 10th centuries. So at the point at which we pick up their tale in the 15th century, they're already 500 years old as a lineage. They were connected to most of the royal houses in Europe. And in fact, there's like a spider's web of connections amongst these families. As Dukes of Ferrara, they were diplomats and warriors. And it's worth bearing that in mind, because when we look at Renaissance art and listen to Renaissance music, we get almost an effete and over aesthetic sensibility. But that was not who they were. Okay, they hired people to do that stuff. In themselves, they were essentially condottieri, that's to say mercenary generals. That was their stock in trade. So that from a very early age, all of the deeste would be learning all of the weapons that would be used in combat. They would be engaging in hunts in the forest, that again, for boar, for whatever, and they would be conducting full-on kind of jousting, basically, just as you would expect to see the knights of King Arthur doing. And in fact, they model themselves more on King Arthur's Round Table than they did on any of the classics. So there's a kind of discord there between who they were and the art that they commissioned and that we're looking at. Now, those two overlap at a certain point, and that point is magical ritual.
Yes, sweetie. Look, in your book, you explain that magic was very important to these Renaissance courts, right?
Absolutely.
And can you explain why that was? Why is magic so important to them?
Okay. I used to think about the question in the way in which you just phrased it, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that magic, mysticism, and spirituality have been integral to every human culture, from the Paleolithic down to today. And in fact, it's easier to talk about those parts of a society who do not accept magic than it is to talk about the rest. In fact, it continues to be pervasive in most cultures around the world today. And in the 15th century, it was certainly pervasive at every level of Italian life, as it was throughout Europe. From folk magic at the, so to speak, the bottom of the pyramid. We have now elaborate accounts through the work of people like Carlo Ginzburg of the Benandanti, these magical bands who will go out and have out-of-body battles with witches. This is extraordinary stuff. The next tier up, the merchants and so on, had their own magic. It was clerics, monks, and theology students who specialized in demonic ritual magic. And they hired their skills out. And these people were protected by the lords and the merchants. So whenever they were kind of arrested and brought to trial by an inquisitor, they were almost always busted out. So they were more or less untouchable. And the reason was the market for their services was, they were so much in demand. I
found that fascinating. I just wanted to just stop you there. You know, you told me a story about one particular magician, and it is fascinating. It's like, guys, you have to understand the whole society is like anti-magic, and then they arrest him, and they're so excited, and then he like slips out the back door. Whoops, because he's got the skills.
Yeah, well, the elite were the primary employers of his services. This is William Bell of Modena, who was the town exorcist, and he was rumored to be able to call up demons just as easily as he could dismiss them. You know, he had quite a magical following in the town, and he was often brought up by an inquisitor, and they actually got him stripped of his priesthood and all of his holdings at one point, and he's promptly reinstituted a few days later. So these people were untouchables.
Unbelievable.
Despite the fact that the church condemned magic in all its forms, it was pervasive and it continued. And the major practitioners were from within the church, to be honest.
They had ritual down. They got ritual.
Yeah,
They grokked
that's
it.
it.
Yeah.
And I think the people who were trained as priests had a natural, or they had a good training in ritual practices generally. And you often find that a ritual has a structure which you can see reflected in most of the formats of the Mass.
Yes,
That's
yes,
one
indeed.
reason that, you know, because we're familiar with it having this structure, that we can begin to identify elements of that within the art.
Well,
So it's
sweetie,
not as though we come.
sorry for interrupting. I was just going to say this. Basically, what you explained, it was kind of news to me. Like, to be honest with you, look, I've known magical people. I've had a fascination with magic, but it wasn't really until I started talking to you and some others that I realized that magic has been with us, you know, since the very beginning of humanity, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of our history that we're trying to understand doesn't make any sense because the magic has been pulled out of it, right? So it's trying to understand the toaster without the toast, if you will, a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so by putting the magic into the solar busker, what you've been able to do is have it open like a flower. And that's what I love about it so much. But one of the things that really kind of, again, has been interesting to me in my journey in general is that the mindset of people at that time is very different to the mindset of people today, right? And you
Yeah.
have this mind as magus thing, right? Is that how you say it? Magus?
Yeah.
Mind of magus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Magus. Yeah.
So can you elaborate a little bit on that for us,
Okay. If you, I'll come to it a little
Oh,
bit
in a minute,
around the
sure.
houses.
Okay, yeah.
To try and appreciate the mindset of the D'Este as a representative of a Renaissance elite family, you can do so through astrology. And one place in which their astrological thinking is writ large is in the Palazzo Schifanoia in Ferrara. And we can see this Salon Dea Messe in this. We have an image of the
Yes, let me put it
room.
up for everybody, sweetie. Here we go. Because it's fabulous. Can everybody see that? Let me, there we go. How's that? All right.
Okay, so this room in the Palazzo Schifanoia in Ferrara is, as you can see, is divided into 3 layers. And at the bottom, you have the courtly life in each month of the year going around about its typical activities. But the top 2 layers are very interesting from the point of view of the Renaissance mindset. Now, it's often been said, okay, this is an astrologically themed fresco cycle. But when we look at it in detail, it's a little bit more than just astrology that's going on here. Can we zoom in, Vanessa, to the upper layers of this?
This one, darling? Or you want to go back?
That's the one.
All right,
no, that's
fabulous.
Super. So this is just one section of the 2-layer Palazzo Schifanoia fresco. And what we have at the top is a deity, essentially, and the deity's main attributes. Now, this has nothing to do with normal astrological work, because normally we have a set of zodiacal signs, and the zodiacal signs have a planetary ruler. But these are not the planetary rulers. This is a completely different set. These are the Olympian deities, identified as super celestial beings.
Wow.
In other words, what we're looking at here is a Renaissance depiction coming straight out of Plato's Symposium of the higher level spiritual hierarchy. Okay, and the layer immediately beneath the deity is divided into 3, and it represents the decans. Now, these are extremely ancient demonic star demons, essentially. They first occur in Egypt around 2000 BC, and they're now here 3,500 years later, decorating the walls of this Palazzo Schifanoia. And between them, the deity and the decans, the star demons, dispense a certain quality of energy on the life in the court below. Okay, so pictorially, they've taken the top level spiritual hierarchy and fastened it to the courtly life in each month of the year. And they've then animated this sequence by including the Duke's birth chart within the cycle, and then illuminated it from outside, because the frescoes are distributed asymmetrically around the room, okay? And each one is slightly different sides. So when the light comes into the room, it highlights different elements of the frescoes at different times of day during the course of the year. So what we're actually looking at is a talisman, an active, dynamic, spiritual talisman to bring the benefits of the deity through the decans down into the courtly life.
Wow, sweetie. You know what's
Okay.
interesting about that is in the Temple of Luxor, they do a kind
Mm.
of a similar thing in the respect that the panels are all
Yeah.
differently shaped as you go
Yes.
around. Yeah, so it's like the same technology is bleeding through here.
Absolutely. So it's the combination of an illustration, its connection to some figure, real living figure, and to the topography and the movement of light, so that you have a unified representation of a certain spiritual idea. So this is the mindset that we're actually dealing with.
Sweetie, just stop for 1 second. Can you explain what a talisman is, perhaps, so that
Well,
people
a
understand?
talisman is a repository of spiritual energy, essentially. And the energy is drawn down from the planets, the stars, the constellations, and fixed into a particular material form so that it continues to emanate that energy subsequently. Okay. So it's
So
a
people
storage
can
and
use it,
emanation.
okay, as kind
Yes,
of like a, yeah.
yeah, it emanates the energy, and whichever characteristic it's given in terms of which energies predominate within the talisman will be the kinds of effects it generates in its environment.
So then the mindset of these people then is that they are magicians. They're not men. They're elevated. They're divine. I mean, what is this telling us, sweetie?
Okay, so we come now to this idea of the Manas Magus, I think, which
Okay.
is your original question. Best way I can answer that is that there were a couple of different levels on which these elites constructed their self-identity. One of them is historical and one of them is deeply esoteric. Okay, so on a historical level, they all claim descent from Troy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now this is a bit strange to our ears, but Troy came to represent, through works like Virgil's Aeneid, a kind of primeval, perfect world of rulership. And when the Aeneas takes the survivors of the Trojan War all around the Mediterranean, and then they found Rome, okay, he brings that pristine leadership to Italy. And therefore, all the elites subsequently wanted to be able to claim descent from these families because it justified their grip on power in the present time. So the d'Este have been claiming descent from a Trojan royal house since at least the 11th century, to the best of my knowledge. So it was, and of course the various court poets and so on embroidered the poetry and the drama they wrote with these myths. So they also served as powerful propaganda. But there's a deeper level to this story. The 7th century Byzantine Paschal Chronicle describes the inhabitants of that area as descendants of Nimrod. And Nimrod was one of the Nephilim, that's to say the product of the intercourse between human women and the angelic watchers. So in a sense, by claiming a Trojan ancestry, they were also laying claim to a semi-divine ancestry as well. And they would read about this in books like Strabo's Geographia, for instance, who describes the people of the Troad as Ophiogeneus, serpent-born, and as the Azoetia, the serpent tribe. So you have a kind of draconian set of associations on a very esoteric level. And the way this surfaces in the card's imagery is through card 20, Nembrotto, which I think we have, don't we, Venus?
Yes, sweetie. Let me get that up.
Cards 20 and 21.
Okay.
We look at them sequentially, right?
Yes, we can, darling. All right, 1 second. Let me get, oh, I have 21.
Yeah.
Let me see if I've got 20. I should have 20, shouldn't I?
I hope.
Yes, me too.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, hold on. Where is it? Let me just check in my folder, darling. Give me 1 second, because I have a folder right here. If not, we can email it to me, or I'm sorry, guys, give me 1 second. It is Mercury retrograde, so there's going to be
Yeah.
some fun games. Sweetie, in my folder, I only have 21.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only point I was going to make about card 20 is that it's actually labeled Nimrod. And it's kind of extraordinary he should show up there, because he's showing up with a tower getting struck by lightning. And I think it's pretty well, this theme is fairly unique to the Faroese. And of course, there's nothing about that in the Bible.
Mm.
So the source of the imagery is coming from well, to be honest, a pagan source, someone like Berosus. And this is a kind of consistent thread throughout the iconography of the solar busker. You can't find any Christian references within it. And this is very strange. Card 21, Nebuchadnezzar, is also a very strange figure to have in a deck of cards, which generally are dominated by figures from Roman history. And Nebuchadnezzar, of course, the first king of Babylon and a spiritual descendant of Nimrod, is a very strange and from a Christian perspective, creepy figure to include. And as the viewers can make out from the imagery of the card itself, it's kind of oblique and strange. If I can just briefly decode this a little for you.
Oh, yes. I'm wondering what it is, darling. Please go ahead.
What we're seeing there is a star-laden globe with two arms crossing. Now, the two arms, the two bands crossing on a globe, and especially a starry globe, was always indicative of the gates of the sun. That's to say the intersection of the Milky Way and the zodiac. And the 2 points at which they intersect on one side is commanded by Cancer and the moon. And it's the point through which souls were believed to incarnate. But the exit through Capricorn, dominated by the dragon, is the portal by which souls leave material existence. And this takes us to the topic of theurgy, of the ritual practice to join human awareness with that of a deity, to merge awareness momentarily, partly as an act of worship, but also to actually affect a union between a human awareness and the deity itself. In other words, a form of possession cult. And that's what's depicted here. He's buried up to his waist, and it looks almost like a fainting figure. So it's this sense of dropping the material shell in order to enable this union. The union, though, is through a draconian figure. So for most people, there's not a sense of a union with God or with some ultimate spiritual force. There's something more conditional about this. And that's what we're exploring as we go on through the other cards.
Well, you kind of blew my mind the first time that you brought up the whole idea of possession cult. And it had not occurred to me that this was something that people would sign up for voluntarily. But you explained to me that the possession cult has really been with humanity since the very beginning of time.
Yes, absolutely. You could say it is the primordial religion, which is, as you say, a strange thought, but yes, I can't explain it. I think possibly it's closer to hand to people who are less intellectual than those who are overly intellectual. Possession is closely related to dance as ritual. And those societies and cultures that retain the immediacy of movement and ritual dance are far closer to the states of consciousness, I think, in which possession becomes possible. We can leave this card now. Thank you, Venice.
No worries, darling. I mean, look, when you talk about ritual or this kind of or ritual, basically. Wait on, let me get rid of this. It seems like ritual has always been with us, right, Dylan? It's like part of our DNA, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know DNA, but it's certainly something which, as I say, through the medium of dance becomes very, very tangible and close. For most of us living in a modern society, ritual dance is something we may see on cinema. But to live in tribal societies that retain that kind of ritual practice is another thing. And it's one of the reasons that it's been such a subject of fascination for anthropology, for instance. Even though they have experienced extraordinary and strange effects when attempting to study these forms. So it remains a very, very potent instrument.
Well, look, I mean, for me, me about 6 months ago. Oh, guys, I'm just going to say we're going to go through this little presentation. And so get all your questions in the question and answer area, and then we'll address them at the end of the presentation part, if that's okay with you guys. But we were talking about ritual, sweetie, and there's some, you know, I kind of thought ritual was light some candles and put on something, you know.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you kind of break down for us really in a little bit more detail, like the subtleties of ritual, so that people can understand that? Are we ready to go there, or do you want to add something first?
No, that's good. I think what I'd want to do is make a distinction between social rituals and esoteric ritual. And esoteric ritual is marked by a very specific requirement. It is the generation of what I call ritual space as a unique form of space. Now, I can perhaps best explain it with a concrete example. And there was an anthropologist, his name was Bruce Grindal. And he's written this paper, Into the Heart of Sisala Experience, for those who are interested in the detail. And basically, he was studying this society in West Africa, and the king's sacred drummer had died, and nobody could understand why he died. So they decided to enact a ritual to inquire about this death. Now, he was not invited, pointedly not invited into this ritual, but he crept in anyway. And what he experienced roughly is that as the ritual dances got going and as the ritual progressed around the body of the king's drummer, he started experiencing the most extreme energetic disturbances in the base of the spine and along the spine. And finally, this energy rose up and like exploded in his head. You know, which this is one of the, we're talking here, of course, about Kundalini energy. And one of the characteristics of very powerful ritual space and ritual enactment is that it energizes the people within the proximity of that. Okay, but upon this explosion in his head of energy, he could suddenly see the ritual as it was happening on another level, on the level of the ritual space rather than the physical space. And what he could see is these long trails of light emanating from the hands of the ritual dancers and playing over the body of the dead drummer. And then as the ritual progressed, the drummer got up off the bar and, seizing a drum, started furiously banging it and reeling round the ritual space.
Holy moly.
Now he wrote all this down in his anthropological journal. Of course, everyone studiously ignores it.
They're like, what were you smoking at the time? Is it Grendel, darling? Grendel?
Bruce Grindle, yeah, it's in that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
Into the Heart of Sisala Experience in Anthropological Research, 1983.
So is
39, yeah.
Oh my, look at that brain of yours, Cheech. So is this a subjective, imaginal realm that you're talking about? Is that where they went?
It's intersubjective.
Intersubjective, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the problem, because it doesn't fit our normal binary categorization of reality. Either it's subjective or it's objective. Well, here's something that has a admixture of both. Wow. Okay, and that is better than anything else as an explanation of what esoteric ritual space is meant to be like.
Wow, sweetie, that's amazing. Okay. Yeah.
So those spaces, after intense ritual is performed for a prolonged time, take on a life of their own. Okay.
And is this where that Mark Stavish's work comes in?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know of any other book who's dealt with this at all, but Mark Stavish's book is there, Egregores.
Fabulous book, by the way, people. I've read it 3 times.
Wow.
Yes.
And it's the characteristic then of ritual to generate these types of spaces. So this has been recognized, I think, from the beginning by people who've practiced magic, that it's not, so to speak, it's not the physical or intellectual movement that generates this space. It's as the word is exfoliated, it's generated from the essence of the ritualist themselves. So it's rather like a spider spinning a web from their own substance. And whilst the substance is invisible to normal physical sight, it's a genuine geography in its own right. So if you extrapolate from that, anything which has become an intense focus of people's emotional life will take on this independent life and become a kind of geography of the spirit.
Is this where like hallucinogens also play a part and come in handy?
They have for a lot of people, Venice. Also people who do out-of-body experience, that type of voyaging. You can journey to the different domains, if you like, that have been built up over countless millennia for the different religious, spiritual, and magical practices.
Wow.
Okay. Now, the one thing that needs to be added in connection with this, after the ritual, Bruce Grindle got very ill indeed.
Oh.
And needed almost a kind of exorcism.
Wow.
So the fields also propagate downwardly. They're not just like free places to go and visit and enjoy like a tourist. I think the best account of this is Rupert Sheldrake's actually. He's talked about these morphic fields, right?
Yes.
And the morphic field also has a property called morphic resonance. That's to say, it propagates downwards into our lives
Yes.
and affects us. So take care which fields you connect to.
Could get interesting. So what do you think it was about this particular field that made him sick? I mean, the dead drummer, dancing fingers, it sounds all pretty lovely and exciting. I mean,
Well,
why do you think he came down? Just his body wasn't prepared for the physical energization necessary to do it, or
absolutely.
okay.
That would be a huge problem for most people, to have a spontaneous and full Kundalini rising. But essentially, it was a necromantic rite. He was
Okay.
connecting to the world of the dead. And if you're going to do that stuff, then you need to be prepared for that. You need to know what you're getting into.
Well, look, I mean, if you're talking about theurgy, right, and in this case, you're talking necromancy, there are other deities and other levels that can be interacted with in theurgy itself, correct? And so
Yes.
in the case of the Solabusca, they weren't trying to do theurgy, as far as I understand it, to a necromantic level. They
No.
were trying to contact something else. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we can look at card 18, Lentullo,
Okay.
if you have it to hand, Venice.
I crossing my fingers after 20. All right. Lordy, lordy, lordy. Look, okay, I have 17, 16. Okay, now Leon, we're going to have Leon find his card 18. We have a helper, my love,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
it's Leon. So why do I have 17? I have 17. I'm going to tell you what I have. 3, 8. I have 8, 12, 15, 16, 17, and 21. So give Leon a second. Hold on. Leon, I'm going to come back. Stop sharing my screen because Leon's on it. Let's see if he's been able to find it. Sweetie, I'm just going to tell you the ones that I have in my folder so that we don't try to find things we can't find. I have 2, 3, 8, 12, 15, 16, 17, and 21. Oh, yes, we could show it on the computer. I mean, from the book.
We can do it from the book, and I have the cards here. Would that be easier?
Oh, look, I mean, look, if we don't have them, then yes, but if we have them, then let's show them. Well, you're finding.
Can this be seen?
Yes, sweetie, great, perfect. Yes, yes.
Oh, there's one. Okay, let me get Lentullo out.
And guys, just do me a favor, put your questions for Peter in the Q&A instead of the chat, because the chat is more of a place where you guys can speak amongst yourselves. And once we wrap this up, then we're going to go to the Q&A. So just copy and paste your questions, lovelies. And all right, so sweetie, which one's that? All right, what number is that, darling?
This is 18.
18, okay.
Lentullo, it's called.
All right, we can see it perfectly well.
Now, just to illustrate the type of complexity with this deck, Lentullo is the name of a Roman. Lentulus, his name was, and he attempted a coup d'etat during Saturnalia, for which he was arrested and duly executed. So this is typical of the types of character who feature in the Solabusca. Some of the most disreputable characters in history are.
Oh my Lord.
So what we actually see there is a depiction of the typical elements of Saturnalia. You know, he's got this like what's called a pileus hat. It's like a shepherd's hat. And during Saturnalia, the slaves were allowed to wear these. They were not allowed headwear otherwise. And the elites wore these beautiful evening dining gowns.
Wow.
Normally, they would not be worn except for an evening meal. It would be very bad form to go around Rome in your dining gown. But during Saturnalia, everything was upside down. So the servants sat at table and the elite served them. And the elite would be dressed in their evening gowns like this. And also they put candles on altars as part of the ritual. Now, that's a perfectly satisfactory layer of explanation. It's showing the characteristic ritual features of Saturnalia. It's indicating a historical figure, Lentulus, who was executed because of his coup d'etat during Saturnalia. But there's elements in these cards which are not accounted for either by the historical or the ritual story.
Now I know why we're looking at this card. This is one of my favorites.
Okay. And the two elements not accounted for are the very broad ribbon tied around his waist, which has a serpent-like ending on it. And this is a reference to an Orphic fragment about the union of Zeus and Rhea in the form of serpents. And the other strange element here is he's gripping his own beard. And in European iconography, this has been a reference to masturbation, indicates a sexual act. So these two elements are incongruous given the explanation we have of the card. So they point to a third layer. And that's my point in the game of Saturn, is that the cards are designed in a polysemous manner. They support several layers of interpretation. And I say this is a characteristic feature of Renaissance works of art. You only have to think of Botticelli's Primavera to see it writ large with a very elaborate Neoplatonic set of layers of explanation. So that's what we're dealing with this deck. We saw the level of sophistication in terms of the use of classical sources in the Palazzo Schifanoia. They're drawing from Plato's Symposium. They're drawing from Proclus's commentary on the Timaeus. And within there, he talks about Iamblichus, another of the great Neoplatonists, who connected the super celestial gods with the decans. And again, Marsilio Ficino in the Renaissance period also repeated these themes since he was a translator of these texts. So in this case, we've got references to, say, Livy's history. We've got references to Saturnalia from Macrobius's Saturnalia, and we've got references to the Orphic fragments. And they all build up to a picture of a sexualized ritual in the name of Saturn.
I was just going to say, this looks like, when you have the serpenty thing and the beard pulling, it looks like a sex magic ritual to me. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So we can drop that one now.
All right, sweetie. So you mentioned, I'm going to say Iamblichus, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so going back to that Manus Magus, there was something about Iamblichus was talking about theurgy in terms of a solar flight, right? Or immortalization, you know,
immortalization.
Kind of yeah. Okay, so
yeah.
this is the way that the man became the magus, right? Through this process of theurgy, essentially. Is it? Or
essentially that's true. Okay. And they were encouraged to think like that by a text that arrived in Italy around 1463. And it was the Hermetica, essentially. So the little story here is the Cosimo de' Medici had Marsilio Ficino, his scholar, busily translating all the works of Plato so they could be read. And then somebody had delivered the Hermetica to Cosimo de' Medici, and he immediately said to Marsilio Ficino, drop Plato. This is far more important. And I need to read this before I die. The reason it was far more important is that it was attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. So in the Renaissance imagination, there was from, let's say, the point of creation at the beginning, a set of mages who explain the inner wisdom and the ultimate nature of reality. And right up close to the point of creation was Hermes Trismegistus. Plato was later on down the line, and therefore he was, by definition, more of a diluted exponent, whereas Hermes Trismegistus would be closer to the source and therefore purer.
Yeah.
So they jumped on this text, and there's one passage in it which is very much relevant to what you're asking about, Manas Magus. It's a quote from the Asclepius, and I can just briefly read it out if you like, Venice.
Oh, yes, please, darling.
And what they translated and what they became aware of is a statement to the effect that what a great miracle man is, Asclepius, a being worthy of reverence and honor. He passes into the nature of a god as though he were himself a god. He understands the race of daemons because he originates from the same source. He despises that part of his nature which is only human, for he has put his hope in the divinity of the other part. So for the Renaissance imaginary, this text would be more authoritative than almost any other text on the planet, stemming as it does from a point very close to the creation. And if it's authoritative, then it must be true by definition.
Yes.
Now, this plays back into the stuff we saw about Nimrod and his part human, part divine ancestry. It plays back into the Trojans as Ophiogeneus, born of the serpent, and the serpent or draconian force as a symbolic representation of deity. And all of these forces coming together, all of this information coming together, strongly suggested that they themselves were capable of extraordinary feats of magic.
And that's the mindset part right there.
That's the mindset. And it went further because with George Gemistus, who brought most of the Platonic understanding or the Orphic understanding of life to Italy, he actually had a mission to revert society back to its Hellenistic roots. So he had a political dynamic as well. So whereas the church was teaching that, you know, upon conception, God makes your soul, you become embodied, and then when you die, if you've followed what the church says, you'll go to heaven. Otherwise, you go to the other place. And George Gemistus, coming from Byzantium, through and through a Hellenist, said the soul is eternal. You've lived many lives and will continue to incarnate for many lives. Therefore, the authority of the church is nothing. And if you unite with one of the deities, you, so to speak, join its entourage, and that affects the trajectory of subsequent incarnations. And this is music in the ears of the elite, of course, because first of all, they feel anyway they're the natural rulers, that they have a divine right to rule. And this is now the promise. If they follow this ritual process, they can guarantee that they're never going to lose hold of this. So there we go. That, I believe, is the dynamic that feeds or motivates the movement of the ritual cards in the Solar Busca.
And that is, for the guys that are familiar with your work, you know, that your minds are already blown. For my magical Egypt people that aren't, this is such a huge idea, right? The idea that you can die and be born back into the family of power and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And all, you know, look, this is highly speculative, as Peter has said before, but all the way down to all the presidents are all related to each other today, right? I mean, it's crazy thought, isn't it? I mean, it's a crazy
The strange thing, Vanessa, is that in tribal societies, you have this concept. You know, talking to a voodoo priest, he was saying the first thing they always do is check with child which lineage they belong to, which families they are connected with. You know, it's so again, I suspect that this has been a profound understanding within human awareness from the beginning, and we've kind of lost it
Yeah.
after the Enlightenment.
Well, we have lost it. Look, we've lost. I mean, look, put it this way. The whole reason for Magical Egypt 3 is that we have lost it. The people have lost the magic, right? We don't do the magic anymore. But I just think that there's other groups out there that are not
Yeah.
doing the magic. That's maybe a little bit too much of a stretch. All right, so sweetie, so let's talk some ritual then. Show us how the ritual works. Are you wanting to do that? Show us some cards that has some ritual in it.
Yeah, let's roll forward a bit, and where to start? We'll start with okay, look, what I want to say is that from my understanding, and this is an evolving understanding, you know, because there's 80 odd cards in this deck, and I've like dealt with like 25 of them. Okay. But I've dealt with the trumps and the core cards, so I feel that this has a good grounding. What I perceive is two ritual processes back to back. The first one is setting up a talisman that becomes the sacrificial issue in the theurgic process that follows. So there's a magical ritual and then there's a theurgical ritual. And the reason that they need a sacrificial material is that they're doing a ritual to Saturn. Okay. And Saturn's characteristic myth, of course, is that he ate all his children.
Yum.
That's the myth. Now, the ritual of a deity always follows the contours of its classical or most prominent myth cycle. So if you're going to do a ritual to Saturn or Kronos or Ammon, then you need to have some kind of sacrificial element as part of it. Okay. So we talked earlier about what is a talisman. Now we're going to see how they would have created a talisman for this ritual process.
And we could do that too these days if we wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just the talisman 101. All right. So, sweetie, is there a card here?
Yeah. 2 of Swords.
2 of Swords.
I know you have that one. I've seen.
All right. Hold on. 2 of Swords. Okay. Wait on. No, hold on. Hold on. What number is it, darling?
2.
It's
at the very far end of the.
That's 3.
Yeah, the other end.
Oh, very good.
There
Yay! Woo! Okay, fantastic. All right, guys. 2, we did it. All right.
Oh,
yes.
No. This is the wrong one. Have you got the Ace of Swords?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Thanks to
Have
Leon.
You got the Ace?
No, I will. I'll get the Ace. Hold on for 1 second. I'm going to go over here. We're going to go back to this thing. It's Mercury retrograde. All right, here we go. Now
I'm taking a big risk doing this during the retrograde.
All right, I've got the trumps. I've got the planes. Ace of Swords. Yes.
Yep. Do you have that, Base?
I have the whole set here, sweetie. Wands. I'm just at wands. Now I'm at swords. All right, here we go. Ace of Swords, and we're going to share the screen. So we're going back here, and we're going to share the screen, and we're going to share this one. Okay, darling. I like the 2 of Swords, so there you go, my love.
Yeah. Now, what I'm seeing here, forget the large blade for the moment.
It's a very large pointy blade.
Yeah, I'll leave that for the moment and concentrate on the hilt of the sword. There's 3 elements that caught my eye when I looked at this. First, the figure in red has a kind of furtive look away to the right, as though it's like, I'm doing something wrong. Okay? His hand is on the ball-like shape. And the hand of the other figure is on the. Now, what I believe is that it's the depiction of masturbation. And what they're suggesting here, because there's also a spare arm coming over and grabbing the forelock of the figure in blue, that is always a reference to tempio or ocasio. That's to say, of the right time. So what I'm suggesting is that there's a attempt here to capture ejaculate at a specific time. Now, in the Renaissance imagination, semen could be cultivated and it would turn into a fully grown homunculus or being, okay? All it needed is the right process of cultivation. So I'm reading this as indicating an act of sexual magic. The timing is important, as we saw with the talismanic frescoes, to have the planets and constellations that exert the type of energy you're interested in capturing at the right time. So an act of sexual magic undertaken at precisely that time would capture those. And when I've looked at the other cards, the characteristic cards I've seen are like Mars, Algol, Mercury, and so on. They're all fairly harsh signs, constellations, fixed stars, and planets. They're all fairly harsh. You know, you don't see Venus, you don't see Jupiter over there. So I'm suggesting they are indications of the planets and constellations that should be at their maximum potency when you perform this act. And so, okay.
Oh, no, so I was just going to say, so this is the collection of the material alone, or
That's
is this...
right.
Okay, so now we have to make the talisman, right? So we've got one ingredient so far.
We've got one ingredient. So
right, what's our next ingredient then?
Our next ingredient then is a card called 16 Olive O.
16. Hey, I've got that. Woohoo.
Great.
All right, sweetie. Okay. Can everybody hold on? I'm going to stop share. I'm going to add share. Okay, here we go. We're going to share Olivo. All right. Here we
Olivo.
go.
Yeah.
And fantastic.
And what we're seeing here is a depiction of Alexander the Great from the Alexandrian Romance literature, in which he killed the basilisk, you know, this famous mythical being whose glance was enough to kill you. And the way Alexander killed it, of course, was to put a mirror in front of its eyes so that it looked at itself and dropped dead. And now the significance of this appears to be that the blood of the basilisk appears in pretty well every magical text from Pliny during the second century, right the way up into the 16th and 17th centuries. The blood of the basilisk is one of the components of magic, as described as this sticky tar-like red substance. And what I believe they're talking about is menstrual blood.
I was just going to say, that sounds a lot like something I'm familiar with.
Yeah. So what they're going to do now is combine these substances in a crucible. And that crucible is depicted as 12 carbonae.
Got it up, darling?
There we go. So here, again, we have a very strange card. The name Carbone doesn't make much sense to anyone. There was a Carbone who was part of the Ferraris court. He was an orator, but there's nothing about the figure's imagery itself that has any connection with his biography. So we have to start, first of all, we start with the fact that he's wearing a dolphin-themed hat.
Ooh.
That's pretty strange.
That is strange.
And what I see in the iconography of this deck is that wherever the dolphin appears, there's like a reference to the lunar current. And at the bottom end of the stick, there's a ribbon tied on, which has a kind of draconian shape. And
yes.
we'll see the draconian shaped hat in use when the Theurgic ritual process gets going.
And one of the things to kind of touch upon here just briefly is that, and Peter goes into quite a lot of detail, is that there is not a thing in this card or any of these cards that are not there on purpose, is there, Darren? It's like every
Yeah,
detail of it has been well thought out, planned, mocked up, rejected, brought back, discussed, philosophized. I mean, so basically, you need to pay attention to every little element.
basically, yes.
So, sweetie, which one do you want? Don't now. I've got them all up.
No, no,
I've got
let
them
me,
all up. Yeah.
let me just, we're talking about how is the talisman made. This is depicting the ritual process of forming the talisman. You'll notice he's got his beard going into this hollow container. The hollow container is a spinning top. The significance of the spinning top is that it was one of the magical implements, because out of Orphism, it was one of Dionysus's toys. Okay, so by right of it being one of his toys, it becomes one of the magical implements. There are a number of them. This one is the spinning top. His beard is going into it. We talked about the sexual significance of the beard. So that's like indicating there's something inside the hollow of this magical implement.
Wow.
What I'm suggesting is in there is the mixture of semen and menses, because that is what forms the homunculus. This is a ritual being conducted under a waning moon, okay? And therefore, it's bringing down the, let's say, more abrasive powers through the mediumship of the moon into the ritual apparatus. This is a ritual which has been talked about since, I think the earliest mention is about 2000 BC. Wow. It's called drawing down the moon, and it's a ritual that's still practiced today within witchcraft circles, okay? It's never changed in 4,000 years. So under a waning moon, he's drawing down those celestial energies into the menstruum to form the talisman. This talisman, I believe, is then going to show up later on in the ritual process as the sacrificial substance. So this is like phase one of the ritual process.
Okay.
There's sufficient information in these 3 or 4 cards for you to revitalize and conduct that ritual.
And that kind of brings us to the point that this is not so much a tarot deck, is it, Darlene? This is more of a grimoire.
This is
a recipe book for
exactly.
magical spells. Yeah. Wow. All right, which card do you want now, Darlene?
Well, let me have a look. Can we discard this one?
Yes.
And let me...
Now, sweetie, just so you know, I have the whole thing up. Leon gave us links to every card. So you just tell me which one and we can find it now.
Okay. I just need to think about, there's one called, well, I had a number of cards which are like preparation stage for, let me move forward. I'm just rolling forward now to, there's a series of cards, 9 Falco. Do you have that one handy? 9
Falco. Yes, we can get it for sure. Is it a sword, a trump, no, 9. Here we go, Falco. I've got it, darling. I have it. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to share screen. And here we go. All right, 9 Falco.
Okay, the reason I included this card is that looking at it didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Okay, but then I encountered a ritual text written by George Gemistos. We mentioned him as the pagan Byzantine intellectual who came to Italy and kind of spurred this whole process of pagan Hellenism and theurgy. And Platon had written a ritual text in which he includes the deities, the calendar for their worship, the hymns to be sung, the keys, the music, and the words to be spoken. And one of his ritual actions is this. It says, face upward, kneel on both knees, raise the hands with palms up and cry, "O gods, be propitious." Whilst repeating this prayer, the people are, first of all, to worship the gods of Olympus by touching the ground with the right hand and simultaneously lifting one knee. Then, after pronouncing this invocation once and kneeling in this way, they are to worship the rest of the gods with the left hand and the same words. In other words, that paragraph, that description of a ritual action to be taken seems to be mirrored in this particular card.
Absolutely.
And it could only come from that source. Okay, so this is, if you like, when what Plato said is that starting any ritual process, you have to first kind of wave to the Olympian gods, and then you have to wave to the chthonic gods. And then in between, you do this kneeling process, according to Plato. So now the rest of the cards are going to be the theurgic ritual itself to bring down or to merge the awareness of the theurgist with the deity. Okay, so we're going to look at a theurgic ritual process.
Woohoo! Get your pens out, people.
It kicks off with a card called Three Lempio.
I have that one, darling. All right.
You sure do.
Okay, Three Lempio. Here we go. All right.
Now, because let me explain why Saturn is important for this process, Vernice. I don't think I've done that up to now. From the earliest Greek or Hellenistic myth cycle, we have Saturn or Kronos ruling, and then Zeus comes along with the Olympians and overthrows him. And Saturn Kronos gets confined to the underworld with all the Titans. Now, this means not that Kronos, Saturn, and the Titans are evil. What it means is that they are the rulers of the material realm, and Zeus has taken over as ruler of the celestial realm. Okay, so if you want to do stuff related to the material realm, the right address is Kronos, Saturn, and the Titans.
Okay.
That's why this elite is concerned with a Saturnian form of worship and ritual practice.
Look, I'm just going to interrupt you.
Okay, go on.
No, I just want to say that Stephen Skinner said a really great analogy. And it's basically, if you want to go to the doctor's office and you don't show up at his office and you don't show up during business hours, you're not going to get the doctor, you know?
Yeah,
and so there are absolute locations astrologically, and there are times and there are places that you need to dial it in to the right recipe to be able to get them. And that's what this card is essentially showing us.
This is one of the early ritual cards, yes. And what this figure has three elements. Firstly, the peculiar depiction of the legs can only be explained as one action, that's curtsying. It's not that the artist didn't know what they were doing, but if you try and depict a curtsy, you would have to cross the legs like that. And you curtsy when you want to retain the body in a vertical plane, so you don't bow into someone else's space. And simultaneously, he has these herbs in the right hand. He's going to drop them onto the brazier at his foot to create incense. And his left arm, his left hand has come across his face, and the artist has taken the trouble of giving the hat a peek. So you can see it's the left hand covering the right eye. And again, going back to Plato, this left-right thing, the right is the celestial gods, the left is the chthonic gods. That's to say Saturn, Kronos, and the Titans. He closes his eye to the celestial gods. He opens his sight to the chthonic gods. And that's what this, okay. So this is a form, the gesture of putting the hand in front of the face in relationship to the gods is called aposkopene. It's you can see it on Minoan brooch, those small gold, I don't know what they're called, depicting Minoan ritual. The women worshipping the goddess have their hands up before their face. So these ritual gestures, a bit like dance, don't alter much over vast tracts of time. They're performative elements. They're not like thought out on the spur of the moment. They're deeply ingrained performative elements. They're almost like the survivors of ritual dance into 15th century liturgical ritual. So with this one, he's in fact done a purification and started the process of invoking the deity to come and manifest itself. As we can now shift to 8 Nerone card. And there we have the sacrifice of the homunculus onto the flames.
That's a card, isn't it? So that's not actually a human baby, that's a homunculus.
Don't ask.
We're going to go with homunculus. This is
We're going to go with the homunculus.
Homunculus.
Yes, absolutely. What else could it be? Nobody'd be mad enough to do anything else. You're right. Okay, so that's the sacrifice. And the next card, 15 Metello, is the invocation itself. And for me, it's one of the most interesting of the cards. You'll see that he's now wearing a dragon hat or cap. So we've shifted from the dolphin themed cap, which was used for a ritual involving the moon, the lunar current, to the dragon as a representation of the draconian force. He is wielding a wand, and the wand is wielded towards a circular object from which is like fire and smoke are belching out of large holes. This is, I believe, the only depiction we have of a ritual instrument first mentioned in the Chaldean oracles in the 2nd century. It's called the top of Hecate, or Hecate's top. And we know from the Neoplatonists that one of these devices, when it's turned one way, it invokes the gods, and pivoted the other way, dismisses them. And this is absolutely, you know, a unique image in the history of magic and theurgy. It actually depicts someone utilizing one of these 2nd century devices. We saw earlier somebody using the spinning top, yes, one of the toys of Dionysus. So all of this convinces me of the Hellenistic provenance of this ritual process. He is dressed in red, purple, and one of the things we do know about theurgic ritual is we have the diary entry of one of Ficino's students, Francesco Diaceto, and in his diary he has an account of how to do a theurgic ritual, and it says, you know, dress in a manner which is in accordance with the deity you're seeking to invoke, and have incenses and stones and crystals, and everything has to be consistent with that deity's attributes. And that's what we're seeing here. So he's using Hecate's top to actually now invoke the deity into possessing. And with 17 Ipeo, we see the act of possession having taken place. And the reason we can say that is that although this figure is dressed as a kind of monk, he has these draconian wings coming out of his back.
Yes, he does.
This is a kind of hybrid figure. And he also has this huge golden, is it diadem? I don't know what to call it, band.
Crown, yeah.
It's suggestive to me of illumined awareness.
Yes, I was going to say the halo. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is, in essence, is the theurgical process that we've been, or I've been tracking through these cards these last few years.
I find it interesting that this card is the one that seems to have the most damage in the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the one card that has evidence of having been held.
Yes.
So if you were to hold it, where it's worn is where your thumbs would be holding the card. You would only hold the card with both hands, surely, if you were doing something with it.
Mm,
I mean, it's not just like picking it up, which normally you would hold it by the edges.
exactly. By the corner.
This is gripping the card, has caused that loss of paint on its surface.
Because one thing that we can say is that the rest of the cards are in remarkably great condition for being as old as they are, right?
Yeah,
And
it
so
appears
yeah.
they've been in private hands for 500 years. They're only bought by the Italian state in 2009. So from the point at which they were made, which we guess is 1490, when they were printed, until 2009, they've been held in private elite hands. It's not until the 18th century that Count and Antiquarian describes the cards. He visited one of the noble families and they had the deck. And he gives enough description of the names of the cards and what's on them. We know it's the Solar Busker.
Mm.
And then their next appearance is in the 20th century when the British Museum took an interest in them and managed to get photographic reproduction. And they displayed that in London in 1913, I think. So that's when the designers of the so-called Rider-Waite actually, it's what's her name? Pixies. Pixies saw them over there at that time.
Oh, wow.
And she incorporated them into that deck of cards, which of course has become one of the most wide. I think there's about 5 of the Solar Busker cards that she used as models for the Waite Smith.
Wow. I had no idea, sweetie.
Yeah.
She missed the baby burning one, thank goodness.
Yeah.
No, sweetie, hold on.
I don't know why.
Darling, do you want to, we've got, just to let you know, we have a bunch of questions for you. So I'm going to give you the option to answer questions or go through another ritual. So what would you like to do?
No, that's it really for the 2 major ritual processes.
All right. So sweetie, how do you feel about answering some questions?
Yeah, you know, if I can, I will.
Okay.
If I can't, I'll say I don't know.
Yes, you're allowed to do that. One question is, could it possibly be associated to the story of Demetra and Demophon of Eleusis?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mentioned that in the game of Saturn, actually, that this holding a baby over the flames has a lot of, I mean, for one thing, the figure holding the baby is waving this like elaborate toy. And one of the characteristics of the myth of Dionysus's killing and consumption was that he was distracted with toys.
Okay.
So the image on one side points to the killing of Dionysus by the Titans, and on the other to Demeter's roasting the baby in the flames to make it immortal. And quite possibly that roasting of the baby in the flames to immortalize it was actually a sacrificial, an echo of an ancient sacrificial rite in which children were immolated. As in Carthage into the almost historical period. There was, you know, the toppets still contain the frazzled remains of children who'd been sacrificed to Ammon, who of course was the Carthaginian form of Kronos, Saturn.
Interesting, sweetie. Yeah.
So yeah, the image, as I've tried to say earlier, the imagery has this polysemy that you know, it's being done in such a rich and sophisticated way that you can get a number of different readings out of it, but none of them totally exhaust the imagery that's depicted on the deck. It allows you to have multiple readings.
Yes,
And
there's
it's
many
very,
layers, isn't there? It's very layered. And as you
and
make a point of, you really have scratched the surface. There's a lot
yeah,
more to decode
and
within there.
not just that, it's executed in a style which we could call the grotesque.
Yes.
You know,
That goes without saying.
so now the reason for utilizing that style is that it undermines certain higher art aspirations. So the grotesque is the knickers hanging round your knees, which appears on one of the cards. Bums feature quite large within the card's imagery. There's these allusions to masturbation and
Reach arounds.
various homoerotic activity. So the whole thing is kind of pitched to be in your face. It's like, whatever you thought we were, we're not. Take this. So the stylistic side of it, which I'm spending quite a bit of time researching right now, has an operative role. It does something because it changes your awareness when you're confronted with grotesque imagery. So how that connects with the ritual processes is kind of an ongoing process of research at the moment. Hopefully I'll produce something about that soon.
Sweetie,
okay, let's go on.
I was going to say, and actually, honestly, have a chance with have a chat with Chance about that.
It'd be good chance to have a chance with Chance.
Because, given his career, he might have an opinion on that. Kevin would like to know, were all the Italian city-states employing this kind of knowledge?
That's very difficult to answer because Ferrara seems to have been fairly unique. I mean, when you look at other artworks, like in Florence or Milan, you don't quite see this grotesque figuration and this sense of an underlying and Saturnian ritual process. There's certainly Saturnian frescoes in Florence, but they tend to be like the birth of the gods. They're kind of thematic in a very arty way. Whereas what we've got here is something far more visceral, far more physical than anything else I've ever encountered in Renaissance. And it suggests to me the d'Este were fairly unique in the depth of their paganism, despite the fact that they had cardinals of the Roman Church for 300 years. There was always a d'Este cardinal. But in terms of the iconography that you see in Ferrara, in these cards, in the Palazzo Schifanoia, they were dyed-in-the-wool Hellenists. And I suspect that the connections between the Ferrarese court and Byzantium were far deeper than we suspect. And there's one good reason for that, is that one of the finest scholars of Greek and Italian went to Constantinople. He lived with the court elite for a few years and then returned and became tutor to Leonello d'Este. And subsequently, he had the chair of Greek at Ferrara University. And he was the translator when the Byzantines came for the great conference to try and reunite the two churches, the Orthodox. And of course, they hosted Platon himself, George Gemistus. The whole shooting match only moved to Florence because there was an outbreak of plague in Ferrara. Otherwise, the entire attempt to unify the churches and the cultures of Byzantium and Renaissance Italy was directed and controlled by the Ferrarese, essentially. So there's a lot of depth there, which really needs digging out.
Fantastic, sweetie. Alina would like to know, what do you think about the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter this Christmas? How is this going to affect us
Oh,
psychologically and energetically?
I'm not an astrologer.
Yeah, look, sweetie, what we'll do is we'll
Sorry.
get an astrologer to answer that because it is a
Yeah,
very good question. All
yeah.
right. So, sweetie, anonymous, which always scares me when I see anonymous questions. But anyway, do you see the solar Busca deck as being a window into a hidden world of esoteric belief within the nobility in medieval to modern period, or do you think of it more as a rare heirloom?
It's definitely a rare heirloom, but it is also a window into a deeply esoteric mindset. I mean, deeper than we'd suspected, given that they have these associations with the draconian current going back to Troy. I mean, it's kind of creepy in its way. And when you consider the subsequent history of the D'Este, you know, Mary of Modena, one of them, married the King of England. She was Queen of England for a period. They were deeply connected with the Hanoverian monarchs. So it's almost like there was a house of Este in Central Europe. The D'Este of Italy were a cadet branch of that, and other branches pretty well ruled the British Empire. So, you know, again, going back to your American presidents, all related to the Queen of England or whatever it was, or King John or whatever it was. Yeah, it's really weird stuff. Really
It
weird.
is indeed. It is indeed. Yeah, look, I mean, look, look, the thing is, I mean, we can speculate. It's fun to speculate, but these cards stand on their own. And what you've done is incredible scholarly research into that. So that work stands on its own, is completely solid, but it is kind of fun. All right. So Frank wants to know, so the cards represent esoteric theurgic ritual processes practiced by elites in the Ferraris family. Why encode the ritual into cards? Did the cards function as talisman themselves? And could you tell us more about the ritual aspect itself in the deck? Are the cards encoded ritual prescriptions?
I think we covered the last part,
Mm.
right? The first part is interesting. From like 1440 at least, there was a tradition of card production in Ferrara. So by the time this deck came to be made, like half a century of card production had been going on there. When you look at some of the other artifacts, one of them is the Mantegna Tarocchi, which was neither by Mantegna nor is it a Tarocchi. Actually, it's a 52 card set that depicts the symbolic life of the Renaissance imagination. And again, that's rather strange. Why put that into a card deck format? Well, when you think about it, it's a handy way to record something. And because you're dealing with imagery and symbolism, it's more easily occluded. Now, the Renaissance had a taste for this kind of stuff because there is a book, if I can pronounce the title of it, they're called the Hypnerotomachia Polyphilo. Okay.
Oh, I want that.
Yeah, it's contemporaneous with the Solar Busca, and it's a highly illustrated book. And I know if those of you who have seen the Ninth Gate film.
Yes.
Yeah, he's going through the book and all those images. Well, this book is like that. And that's really weird. I mean, okay, in that case, it took a book form. In the Palazzo Schifanoia, it took a fresco form, wall-sized. And in the Solar Busca, a card deck form. So what I'm on, other card decks like the Visconti Sforza deck are more conventional tarot decks in their imagery, but they have silver and gold gilt. And actually, they're in perfect condition today. They're never used for card playing. They were gifts in the diplomatic and dynastic life of these families. So these families utilized a whole range of artifacts to record and to manipulate the political
I
and
was just
social
going to
life.
say, you talk about it's not just, these things were to manipulate the people within the court. If they're in good favor, they got to see them. If they were bad boys, they got banned. So it was also a tool of
Yeah.
rulership and manipulation,
Yeah, we
so
have a good case of that with the so-called Borso d'Este Bible. And he had this glorious illuminated Bible made. It was in 2 volumes, and it had its own horse to carry it. And when he went, for instance, to the Vatican, he'd have it set up in a room and control access who could see it and who couldn't see it, so that it became a way of bestowing a favor. So the d'Este especially were renowned for this use of artworks as part of the diplomatic currency of the time. Okay. And as I said, in themselves, they were essentially these condottieri warrior types. I mean, they spent most of their year, every year, in the saddle on the battlefront. They were hardened warriors. So all of this artistic stuff became a way of embroidering their rulership, of demonstrating their magnificence, their fitness to rule, and their wealth. So the fact that they embroidered it with these extraordinary themes, the Palazzo Chiffonnier and the Sola Busca are pretty well on the same plane of, wow, Neoplatonic scholarship. And the Mantegna Tarocchi is just outstanding encyclopedia of Renaissance emblems and imaginary themes. So yeah, it is extraordinary that the Sola Busca has this content, but it was not totally out of place with these, certainly with the d'Este.
So, sweetie, given that you've done the cards that you've done, HJ wants to know, do you have future plans to explore and publish more on the minor arcana?
Yeah, I wish I could break into them. That's why I'm working on the grotesque as a stylistic idiom, in an attempt to get leverage over the suit cards and try and understand why they were configured in the way that they've been configured and what the significance of that is. I think there's about half a dozen of the cards, of the suit cards, kind of decoded, and that's covered in the Game of Saturn. But the rest of them, which is a lot of cards, is not. And we haven't talked about the court cards up to now, but again, you've got depiction of the key figures from the Alexander Romance literature, which is fine. That was a popular literature of the day. But why they're the figures associated with Alexander's conception, not with anything he actually did in his life, is extraordinary. And again, you have this sense of multi-generational lineage, bloodline going on over there. Okay. And that may well bear a little more looking into.
So, people, you have your homework in the Facebook group. Start looking at the cards, start pointing out the things that you see. Let's mind meld this. All right. So Keir wants to know, what do you think about the possibility of, am I not loud enough for you, darling? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. What do you think about the possibility of taboo transgression cults, Peter? The images and recent revelations with NXIVM and Epstein and all these guys have got me thinking about ritual initiation involving breaking taboos.
Yeah, I think that when I've looked at this subject, what I have seen is that in the context of what we would call warrior societies, initiatory practices are very harsh generally. The breaking of taboo kind of goes along with that because it's a disruption of the persona. And I think we need to separate those types of initiation, of which I would also in that context mention the Roman rites of the god Mithras, which involved quite extreme practices, let's say. That's a topic for another day. Okay, so you have, on the one hand, rites of initiation, which are harsh or transgressive, and on the other, you have certain theurgic rituals, which are anything but that. So it looks like, on the one hand, you're trying to restructure the persona, and on the other hand, you're just trying to do a pure spiritual exercise. That's how I would separate these two streams. So transgressive rites are generally aimed at a restructuring of the persona.
Fantastic, sweetie. Okay, sorry. Guys, I've just posted in a question, and there is the Facebook group for everybody that we'll go into. Sweetie, what I'm telling people is that when you talked about the hypnagogia, erotica, booka,
Yeah.
lucky, people are wanting
Yeah.
the name of that. So we'll put that in the group, and we'll also put the book from the guy that did the dancing with the fingers.
Oh, the anthropology journal
Yes.
details.
So we'll put those
Yeah.
in the group so people can find
Yeah.
those. All right. Kevin wants to know was was this type of theurgy about giving the ego power and certainty over fate on earth rather than bringing down the soul and refining oneself through the virtues?
Yeah, I mean, what he's presenting there is the kind of model of theurgy we've all inherited from the literature up to now. The notion of, the notion of escape is the overcoming of karma in modern terms, or of necessity in Neoplatonic terms. And necessity is related to one's behavior and posture in life. Okay, so I don't believe theurgy was ever going to give a escape mechanism. What it was going to do is connect a person with a spiritual lineage that they could then employ in subsequent lifetimes. It kind of gives you a leg up. Okay, but this notion of a total escape into some absolute world of perfection is something we'd associate more, I think, with the kind of, I don't know, nirvana type theology. And I'm not sure that it's appropriate to lay that construct on top of this. This is a very interesting area. It needs a lot of deep thought and investigation, and there's not a clear answer at this point.
Fabulous. I just have a comment from Mark Stavish here about, I'm going to try to say it properly now, hypnoerotimachia, right? Which is the strife of love in a dream. That sounds beautiful. Yeah. Was translated by the fabulous Jocelyn Godwin. Hopefully you all know him. If you don't, find out who he is. And it's available from Thames, is it like the river, and Hudson, an account of... Yeah, okay. An account of modern experiment with the creation of the homunculus can be found in Israel Regardie and the Philosopher's Stone by Joseph Lizowiecki. There we go. So
thank you, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Michael Vanasek says, with all that has been presented in mind, what do you think alchemists, hermeticists of all time are communicating to us in the present, in essence, and at the highest level? In other words, what have you found is the syncretic connection of a universal symbolic expression of communicative thread through time that is attempting to tell us, of which I am asking what you think and what something is? There you go. That's a question for you.
That's a question. I think for a long time, I thought in the same terms as the way this question is framed. The more I've looked at the literature, the more I've began to feel that alchemy is not one thing, it's several things. First of all, it's separated in terms of different practices and the outcomes that were expected from them. And it's also separated by cultural layers. So for instance, you can trace it back to early Egyptian symbolism. Okay, and from ancient Egypt through to 17th, 18th century is absolutely vast cultural spectrum. And what we've seen during the course of our shift through that cultural spectrum is a move towards an Enlightenment form of materialism. Okay, so that although people like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle still practiced alchemy, they did so in a different way than, say, the spiritual alchemists of the 16th century or the 15th century. So we should really be talking about alchemies, different alchemies as separate disciplines, each with a different goal in mind. The earliest alchemical text that I found, Zosimus of Panopolis, the earliest written text, talks about alchemy more in terms of what we would see in the Solar Buska. That's to say, connecting to another dimensional entity and gaining the knowledge, the insight from that interaction to free oneself from necessity, from the drive of fate. So that's a form of spiritual alchemy at a very early stage of development. You know, another alchemy is Carl Jung's alchemy. His famous book, Psychology and Alchemy, based on the work of Herbert Silberer, looked at alchemy as a form of integration process within the psyche. And that's another valid way of looking at alchemy. And then you have the people like the alchemy conducted in the Medici laboratory. You know, in the Uffizi, they had a whole floor devoted to alchemy. But what they were doing is producing specific materials to be exported throughout Europe. So alchemy for them was actual production. And their alchemy laboratories were adjacent to their artistic studios. So the artists were also borrowing and providing techniques for the refinement of paints. So this is another world of alchemy. So, you know, when we talk about alchemy now, we can't really throw a unifying veil over it. You know, you can't gather it all together as one thing. It's many different things, and that's maybe not a very satisfying answer, but it comes closest to what we see when we look close up.
That's beautiful. And guys, I'm just going to say this because we've got so many questions and it's late there. What I want you to do is I'm going through and I'm answering one of your questions as I'm going down the list. So if you've got 3 or 4 questions on there, you can leave them, but just indicate to me which is your most important question, because I'm going to see how we go and we might get one. Okay. Mike asks, where does the mythology of Saturn emerge from? Why the association with the serpent as well as the bull?
Yeah, I mean, you go right back to Hesiod's Theogony in the Hellenistic tradition. And that's where I was saying that the story of how Zeus and the Olympians overthrew Kronos and the Titans is the origin of this whole kind of mythology. So in a non-dualistic fashion, that's to say, you know, without the kind of Gnostic dualism, good and bad, the Saturn, Kronos, and the Titans become the rulers of the material and underworlds, and the Olympian gods become the rulers of the celestial worlds. So depending on the kind of work you need to do or want to do, you call upon the respective parties. And that's more the spirit in which we can frame the Solar Buska today. Initially, when I wrote the book, I was very much influenced by a Gnostic, good, bad, Christian type worldview to try and understand what I was looking at. Over time, I've come to a far more Hellenistic worldview in an attempt to understand this material. I don't know if that answers the question. The serpent or the draconian form of deity is the primordial form of deity within Hellenism. So that you see Zeus and Rhea uniting in the form of Dracon, or you have Dionysus Zagreus, you know, with the horns, he's draconian entity. So the god and the dragon were one and the same form. The reason that this makes sense to me is that the connection with a deity energizes the Kundalini. The experience that comes closest to that of deity is of the rising of the serpent power. And so in a beautiful Orphic bowl that's illustrated in the game of Saturn, you can actually see the priest or priestess represented as a dragon in the midst of all the ritualists. Okay, so possession by the deity naturally symbolized as possession in the draconian form.
Fabulous. All right, I'm going to give you a break because Andy has a question for me. Okay. Andy wants to know, what on earth does this have to do with Magical Egypt 3? Well, good question.
Get out of that.
The first thing is that the simple answer is that Peter is in Magical Egypt 3. He's featured. He is essentially the spine of Magical Egypt 3, and there's a very good reason for that. Magical Egypt was named Magical Egypt by John Anthony West. So in fact, John's tours were called Magical Egypt before there was a Magical Egypt series. And we were sitting around one day and we're like, why did he call it Magical Egypt? Like, what is what? Like, why Magical Egypt? And we started thinking about it and we started doing some research. And essentially what we came to find is kind of what I iterated a little bit about in the beginning, is that looking at history without magic is like looking at a toaster without toast. You have very little chance of understanding what the purpose of ancient Egypt was. And even in the Talmud, they state that, you know, there were 10 bits of magic that were given to the world and Egypt got 9 of them, right? So the Egyptian culture is steeped in magic, and if we want to get inside the mindset of the ancient Egyptian and really truly understand what it was that they were doing there, then we have to understand magic. And so we have interviewed lots of fabulous people who magic is their specialty. And as Peter and I were laughing the other day, what did we get ourselves into? Because it's a deep and broad subject, but that's why Peter is here with us tonight. And this work is an example of magic used in history. And so that's really as far as the correlation goes here. But what Peter's speaking about in the show is more magic and the mysteries in general. So I hope that answers your question, darling. All right, Faith wants to know, is there any evidence other than the Solabasca for esoteric ritual practice within the Ferrara elite?
Well, the Palazzo Schiffernoyer is entirely a magical object, but outside of the Solabasca, no. As I said, the Solabasca has been held in private hands for nigh on 500 years. I mean, it simply was not a, public object. It was not it was never made public. It's only kind of, I guess, for money, because it was purchased for 800,000 euro by the Italian state. So I suspect that somebody needed to sell it, and that's the only reason we even know about it at this level of detail. The photographic plates that the British Museum have long disappeared, and any evidence of that exhibition of the deck of cards, well, I can't find any. So apart from this purchase and then the sudden availability of decks of cards of the solar busker, it would be totally unknown to our magical history. So it's a very late comer on the scene, and it was never intended that the public ever have a chance to see it.
Very good, Darlin. I have James who wants to know, do you practice these rituals yourself, or have you or have any experience of spiritual nature related to it? I thought that might be a quick one.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing for me was that in writing this book, I felt guided in so many ways onto information that was very arcane, very obscure. I had bouts of enormous energy. I mean, an absolutely colossal level. I'm an energy worker. I work with this every day of the week. But these levels of energy were quite unknown to me before, literally paralyzing for 3 or 4 days. Luckily, it only happened a few times, but it was very overwhelming. And then there was one episode in which my wife kept hearing this voice saying, Elohim, 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 and it went on all day long, you know, and she was saying to me, you must check this out. It has something to do with the deck. You know, they're saying to me, Elohim. And I was thinking, well, what the heck does that mean, you know? I knew Elohim. But I thought this is nothing to do with Kabbalah or Judaism. That can't be right, you know. And then a few days later, I was browsing through this 2nd century text, and there it was. I couldn't believe it. It was a citation of a Hellenistic philosopher, so something from like 3rd or 4th century BCE. And it says, another name for Saturn is Elos, and the followers of Saturn are known as the Elohim. So there's an extraordinary background to the writing of the book, which is highly esoteric and inexplicable. Yeah.
Sweetie, Leon says that, or asks the question that, you know, kind of why a tarot deck? But more than that, a tarot deck is structured as a game. So is there anything important about the fact that they're played with or it's structured as a game?
Well, the tarocchi or tarot decks that were used for gaming purposes had simple suit cards, just like a modern deck of cards. They only had the 22 illustrated trumps, and the illustrations were standard. They were standardized very early on, from like 1440 or so. They always had, you know, typical, the estates of man, you know, poor man, beggar man, prince, king, empress. They always had certain of the planets, Venus, Mars. They always had like the end times, those Christian themes. So you have although the sequences of those cards varied somewhat between Bologna, Ferrara, or Milan, the actual imagery didn't vary at all, and has continued until today. So in that respect, the solar busker is kind of utterly unique. It has no relationship whatsoever to normal tarot or tarocchi imagery. And it has a fully illustrated set of suit cards. And furthermore, it was created using copper plate engraving. In other words, they cut 80 copper plates to the right size, and then a master engraver engraved each one of them in order to be able to print off a deck of cards, which were then hand painted. So, you know, even the process is quite extraordinary, quite extraordinarily precise and expensive. And because of that, we know that our production in Italy of anything of importance or scale would first be given to one of the court's scholars. And that scholar would then do the research necessary to define the characters, their posture, their coloration. And all of this would be defined before it was passed to an artist to start doing drafts. So in other words, a work of art like this, or like Botticelli's Primavera, was first and foremost a text written by a humanist scholar, describing in detail what the artist had to execute. So you shift the whole thing away from artists doing packs of cards for gaming purposes to a major humanist scholar designing a very elaborate and sophisticated set of images. The entire context is different than standard card production.
All right, sweetie. Daniel, I've just answered your question. I'm just going to say it very quickly. Yes, we do think the card was held, or we think it's possibly held because it has worn out marks on it. It's the only card that has wear and tear on it. So I think we've gone through everybody's first question. There's just one here that I think, and then we might end it for you, darling. How are you doing? You hanging in there?
I'm fine.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
All
my
right,
favorite subject in all the world.
All right, as long as we don't poop you out, sweetie. We've had you going for quite a while now.
I'm good.
You're good? All right. Mike
Let's
wants to
do
know,
another hour.
Okay. I want to crack some champagne. All right. Is there any information on the state of being that is supposed to be achieved once synergy with the draconian deity is made possible? Are there any descriptions of these powers or insights granted the person once they've connected to the deity?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not aware of any. What we do have, and it's not quite the same thing perhaps, are some accounts from or after or during initiation into the ancient mystery cults. And they were quite clear. I saw the gods close at hand and I worshiped them. So from a visual perspective, they were in that egregore. They were seeing the world view of the deity, the symbolic world of the deity, as though they were living in it. Energetically, normally you would, and we know this from contemporary accounts of a Indo-Tibetan practice, better known as deity yoga, which is still practiced today, that what you have is an enormous sense of clarity come upon you. You feel a heat, a huge energy. You have a vision of the deity or deities. And in that Indo-Tibetan tradition, they're often in union with each other, it's the deity and consort. And you have an enormous sense of transcendence of the human condition. It's almost as though you become a deity yourself in terms of your awareness. So I suspect that successful theurgy would have these characteristics. And I can add one other thing to that. My recent research has confirmed that theurgy emerged in the Platonic Academy in Athens at precisely the time that the mystery cults at Eleusis were closed down. And the people who opened the Platonic Academy were members of the same initiatory priesthood that had conducted the mysteries at Eleusis. So there's a direct connection between mystery initiation and theurgy. Okay, I hope that helps answer that.
Okay, what are those globes that are attached to the thread shown in several cards, but for example in Carbone?
Yeah. They look like tintinnabula. There's a good answer.
That's a good word. We're getting a lot of good words tonight.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get an Oxford dictionary to find that one. Tintinnabula, I think, are balls with a kind of rattle inside them, or they could be bells, and they have them on these sticks with long threads and like waved it around so that they were used to entertain or distract crying babies, or Tintinnabula is my best guess. Good luck with that. There's another bit of research for someone to do. Renaissance toys.
I know, eh? Look, I just want to.
That took me days to dig out for this. I tell you, you can't imagine.
No, I mean, where do you even start, sweetie? Where do you even start to find what were the toys? Yeah, no, look. Oh,
Yeah, that's exactly where I start. Yeah.
um, guys, I just want to say I've just popped up your link to tell people they can get your books at Amazon, but we want to tell them something, don't we? We've still got a few little questions, but the point is, guys, if you see Peter's book for $197, go to Scarlet Imprint, because it's not that much, is it, darling? There's somebody
No.
who's reselling them on at a high price. So if you see them for that price, go directly to Scarlet Imprint, but they are available at Amazon. So I just want to say that so that you don't freak out when you get there and you see it.
Yeah, for those in the US, we now have an arrangement whereby they're printed and distributed within the US. So
Great.
for those of you within the US, Amazon.com is your address if you want the books. And for others, you need to go to Scarlet Imprint, the publisher.
Fabulous, sweetie.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Now, Michael would like to know, what will it take for humanity at large to be able to...
No.
We're just giving you a little easy one to finish the evening. At large, to be able to reintegrate and effectively navigate the ancient divine wisdom through theurgic or magical practice. It's a loaded question. And I think, honestly, sweetie, a lot of it has to do, and an easy way to answer that might be kind of move away from the materialistic paradigm, perhaps, yeah?
Yeah, and that's kind of prerequisite, you know. It's going to take a lot of commitment. The easiest path to, as I say, deity yoga is deity yoga, you know, the Vajrayana tradition, but you need to be aware that it is not a tourist trip. It's not like, oh, let's go along and see. You won't get what you want. To undertake those initiations, you have to swear to a whole raft of oaths concerning how you conduct your life. And, you know, they're fairly detailed. They cover every aspect. In other words, if you're not 100% committed to this, you shouldn't take it on board. And within the Western magical tradition, of course, there's a very famous ritual called the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel.
I was going to ask you about that. Yes.
You know, and that is a Judaic theurgic ritual to produce the same effect. And it takes quite a long time. It is really demanding. So, you know, there's like a fast path, and then there's try and pick yourself up by your own bootlaces path. So for most people, theurgy is a bit like the latter, picking yourself up by your own bootlaces. Without initiation, that's to say somebody who carries a lineage, connecting them to a deity, it's really hard work. But the short path, you really have to be committed to it. You have to be ready to take those oaths and then to live your life according to them.
And that's the possession path, essentially.
Not possession, more like I'd say deity yoga, which is a form of possession. But for instance, in the Dzogchen tradition, they give the initiation immediately. So you have the influx of energy of the deity, but then you can't sustain it. You fall away from it. And, you know, for most people, that's a huge disappointment, because they then have to start the laborious process of inner purification, changing their lifestyle to recover the process. So these things can be done, but they're kind of for the few. You know, you need to be pretty dedicated to achieving enlightenment in this one lifetime. But even with these initiations, they say it may take 100 or 1,000 lifetimes. You need to see what you're up against here.
Sweetie, Kevin would like to know, is there something about the backgrounds of the cards? Oh, no, hold on. It's Kier. Kier wants to know about the barren landscapes. What's the deal with the barren landscapes?
I mentioned earlier the kind of grotesque idiom into which the imagery has been cast, and that is part of it. Now, this is something I'm currently studying, so I don't have much to say about it. But the word grotesque, I mean, it emerges from the discovery of Nero's palace. Accidentally, they kind of fell through the roof of it. And then when they saw the frescoes painted there, the decorative frescoes, grotto is a cave and groteschi were these decorative imageries. So all the famous artists of the day had themselves lowered down into, this would be about 1485. So prior to the deck's design, probably, this idiom of the grotesque was very fashionable amongst Renaissance artists. But what we have in the Solar Buska is the transfer of the idea of the grotesque to the figuration as well. The figures themselves are actually grotesque. And as far as I can see, this is a first in the history of art.
Wow,
And
first.
you know, it's kind of extraordinary. I don't know of any other artwork that has these, you know, this grotesquerie so well delineated. Yeah. And what you did have in some early Bibles and prayer books and so on, hymn books, is kind of hybrid figures in the margins. So there's definitely a long-standing tradition of that going right back to the 10th century or what. But in the Solar Buska, these are like Renaissance figures, right? They're fully formed, three-dimensional people, but they're pitched in a grotesque way, you know, which is quite extraordinary. There's work to be done there on the stylistics. And I suspect, therefore, that the backgrounds are equally in the same stylistic idiom. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Last question, my love. Last question. So here we go. I know, it's like, woo. All right.
49. I know the answer to that one. 49.
Well, we're done. That's it. We can all just go off now. Sweetie, the draconian deities at odds with celestial deities, or more or two aspects of this are the draconian deities at odds with the celestial deities, or are more of two aspects of the same deity?
Yeah, I think it's more of different aspects. There's a very famous painting of Zeus in the form of a dracon impregnating one of the women. You know, at other times he shows up as a hail of gold coins, but in one of them, as a serpent, he impregnates Persephone, for instance. And you know, out of that is born one of Dionysus has one of his births. So, you know, Dionysus is draconian, Persephone is draconian, she's in the form of a serpent. Zeus takes the form of the dracon to have intercourse with us. So it just kind of winds through all of these deities. You can't really pitch them as good and bad, you know, like the draconian or the bad ones. It's not like that. It's more like a universal energy kind of symbolism that we're dealing with.
Fantastic. Well, sweetie, that was just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Thank you guys for the great questions too. There were some really
thank you very much.
Ones. And I appreciate you guys so much. I can't wait for you to see Peter in Magical Egypt 3. And please buy Peter's books. The PayPal link is there if you want to donate something. It's going through us because they don't have PayPal in Turkey, do they, darling?
They don't.
No. So we're going to handle that for him. Scarlet Imprint, Amazon.com. Thank you all so much. And we'll be seeing you soon, Peter.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you, Vanessa. Been a great evening.
It's been fabulous. I loved it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. All right, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.